So you either went to bed early or haven't been to bed yet, is that right? Okay, my slides coming. Excellent, fantastic. We're going to talk about three things. We're going to talk about AI, it's a popular topic right now. We'll talk about innovation, how it can bring people and technology together to do amazing things. And we'll talk about the impact that these technologies are going to have on society. We've got a lot of content. I'll go very, very quickly, leave plenty of time for questions. I wear two hats, an academic hat. For the past 25 years I've been researching AI. My undergraduate, master's, PhD, postdocs are all in AI. I ran a master's program in UCL, which was one of the world's leading universities in AI, and now I'm entrepreneur in residence for UCL, so I help them take deep technology and spin it out. I wear a corporate hat. I'm the CEO of a company called Satalia. We've been building AI solutions for companies for the past 15 years. We were acquired by WPP 18 months ago, where I take on the Chief AI Officer role, and I get to invest in companies now building AI solutions. So let's talk about intelligence. So when I build systems for organizations, they usually have these different components, and I'm going to make this very interactive. I know it's early, but my goal is to wake you up so that you're ready for the rest of the day. And the first question I want to ask you all, it's smoky in here, isn't it? The first question I want to ask you all is, what is data? Does anybody know the definition of data? Not information. It comes from the Latin word datum, which means given things. It's stuff. It's the fabric of our universe, bits and bytes, ones and zeros. It's the sound that's going into your ears. It's the light that's going into your eyes. If I say to you 210280, it's data. If I say it's the date of birth or how much money I have in my account, it becomes information. Information is data in context. Let's get you warmed up. If I said to you, my laptop is sick, what does that mean? It's awesome, you're cool, aren't you? If you're old and boring like me, it means it's broken. If I ask you to read, if I ask you to read this sentence and create a picture in your mind of what you think is going on, does anybody want to share what's going on in their mind? What picture do you have in your mind? Maybe a guy reading a letter out loud to a lady called Mary. So this data could be interpreted in many ways. John could be reading a letter that was addressed to Mary or sent to Mary. John could be reading the alphabet A, B, C, D to Mary. John could be reading the letter of the law to Mary. John could be reading a book called The Letter to a lady called Mary. John could be reading a book called The Letter to Mary. It could be instruction, John, read the letter to Mary. This can be interpreted in many, many different ways, and we will all go away with a picture in our mind of what we think is correct, and we're probably wrong. And my goal today is to convince you all that humans are rubbish. That's my goal today. Anyway, if I gave you a spreadsheet, in the spreadsheet it has three columns. There's a column which is the date, column which is the temperature on that date, and the column which is the number of ice creams I sold on that day. So date, temperature, ice cream sales. What would you do with that information? What would you do with that spreadsheet? Not a trick question. Huh? Okay, we'll draw a graph. Along the x-axis we have increasing temperature, along the y-axis increasing ice cream sales. What does that graph look like? We can wave your arms around. Yes, exactly. The hotter it gets, the more ice creams we sell. This is descriptive analytics. What we're doing is we're organising information to try to find patterns, to know things about the world. Plato had a fantastic definition for knowledge. He said knowledge is justified true belief. So knowledge isn't necessarily a fact. Based on our experience, based on the statistics, we believe something about the world. Now we can do something really cool now, which is what everybody's getting excited about. We can do a thing called predictive analytics. We put a line through it. So now you're all data scientists, we now have predictive power, and we can use more and more sophisticated mathematics, more complex algorithms to essentially get a better fit of that line to that data. And I would argue that all we're trying to do in machine learning, in data science, is to fit some sort of line or plane or hyperplane to some data set to give us the best predictive power. But knowing something is very different to understanding something. Why do we sell ice creams when it's hot outside? Why do we sell ice creams when it's hot outside? Right, so I'm inside, it's hot outside. The first thing we do in the UK is we go outside because it's a scarce resource. We see it for 2 weeks of the year. Then we get hot, and then we buy an ice cream. And why does an ice cream cool us down? Yeah, thermodynamics. To expect a computer to understand that narrative from that line is impossible. It doesn't understand about thermodynamics, it doesn't understand about human behaviour. So it's really important that we bring the people that understand the world together with the people that are very good at finding patterns from data. And because your domain expert is going to say, Daniel, your model of the world here is wrong. It's existentially wrong, because if tomorrow is the hottest day ever, scorching hot, my factory is going to manufacture lots of ice creams. But what will really happen if tomorrow is the hottest day ever? People won't go outside, so you won't sell any ice cream. So the model of the world looks more like this. Anyway, I would argue that what we're trying to do is understand the world perfectly so that we can make good decisions. And it turns out that humans are rubbish at making decisions. So I'm going to try and convince you of that now. I don't know if you read the book by Daniel Hulme, Thinking Fast and Slow. Daniel Hulme is a Nobel Prize winning economist, and he argues we have a fast brain and a slow brain, and actually there are parallels in terms of how these brains work with how AIs work, which I'll talk about later on. So I'm going to ask you some maths questions. I know that it's very early, but your job is to answer these maths questions as fast as possible. If you don't answer them faster than your competitors, they're going to take your market. Okay, so speed is important. We'll start out nice and easy, very easy. We'll get more and more complicated. So the first question, what's 2 times 2? Okay, what's 14 times 7? This one, you need to think about. This one, you have to go through a process now and pick the answer. Okay, well, I'll ask you a few more maths questions. Again, we'll start out nice and easy, we'll get more and more complicated. The combined price of a bat and a ball is £1.10. The bat is £1 more than the ball. How much is the ball?
5.
You knew the answer already, didn't you? If you thought 10 pence, don't worry, you're not broken. It's not 10 pence. The bat is £1.05. The ball is 5 pence. The combined price is £1.10. I'll give you thousands of these examples, including you, and you'll get it wrong because you're using your fast brain. Okay. Ignore this here. Imagine I've got 5 staff members that I need to allocate to 5 jobs. 5 staff members, 5 jobs. How many ways can I allocate 5 people to 5 jobs? How many ways can I allocate 5 people to 5 jobs? Remember exclamation mark, factorial, we learned to school, 5 times 4 times 3 times 2 times 1. There's 120 possible ways I can allocate 5 people to 5 jobs. Let's make the problem a bit more complicated. I've got 15 people. How many ways can I allocate 15 people to 15 jobs? And don't say 15 factorial. Yeah? Get that a lot. What does your fast brain say? How many ways can I allocate 15 people to 15 jobs? Okay, so over 1 trillion possible ways. To expect a human to solve that problem, we are wasting our time. One rule to take away with you today: anything more than 7, don't use a human for. Okay? And actually, industry don't have problems of this size; they've got problems of this size. So here are 500 staff members. How many ways can I allocate them? Big number. It's a number that's got over 1,000 digits. And just to put this number into context, this is how many atoms there are in the universe. Once you reach about 60 things you have to consider, you have more possible combinations than you have atoms in the universe. Humans can solve problems up to 7. You can hire a good computer scientist that can solve problems up to 30 or 40. To solve problems of this size, you need to have deep, deep expertise in algorithms. Just to drum this problem home, imagine you've got your ice cream van, and your ice cream van has to deliver ice creams around these 24 points around London. Now, humans are quite good at solving these spatial problems. After a few minutes, we'll draw a nice path around these points. How long will it take a computer to get the shortest path, the one that's going to save us the most amount of petrol, time? Seconds. Somewhere between that and 20 billion years. If you put 24 times 23 times 22 into your calculator, you get this number. If you had a computer that could look at 1 million routes a second, check 1 million routes a second, it would take 20 billion years to go through every single possible one and say, this one that I looked at 10 billion years ago, you should do this one. And if I had another point for the map, it's now 25 times 20 billion years, so 5,000 billion years. If I had another point for the map, it's 26 times 5,000 billion years. These are exponential problems. They get ugly very quickly. One of my clients is Tesco. They're delivering to 200,000 points on a map a day. 200,000 factorial. You don't have gazillions of years to solve that problem. You have milliseconds between each customer coming in to optimize those vehicles. Algorithms are very important. When I build systems for companies, they usually have these 3 parts. Everybody's getting excited about building data lakes. I would argue that's a silly thing to do. Happy to take that offline. Anyway, once you've got your data lake, then companies are hiring data scientists, my students, machine learning experts to extract insights from that data. They hope that by extracting better insights, human beings are able to make better decisions. And for the most part, they don't. Decision making is a completely different field in computer science. It used to be called operations research if you're old enough. It's optimization, it's discrete mathematics. I would argue you need to identify that problem first, solve it algorithmically, and then work backwards and figure out what insights can help you make better decisions. If I build a system that I give data to and it makes a decision, tomorrow I give the same data and make the same decision, I have automation. And automation is amazing because we can get computers to do things way better than human beings. But does anybody know the definition of stupidity? What's the definition? Doing the same thing over again and expecting a different answer. By definition, automation is stupid. By definition, it is not intelligent, it's not AI. I know that everybody that currently touches this stack is calling themselves an AI company, and that's fine, you get more clients, more VC funding. But there are 2 definitions of AI. The first definition is getting computers to do things that humans can do. So over the past 10 years, we've managed to get machines to do things that traditionally only human beings can do. Recognize objects and images, corresponding natural language. And because humans are the most intelligent thing we know in the universe, when we get machines to do things that humans can do, we assume that that's intelligence. I would argue that humans are not intelligent. That's a different talk. There's actually a much better definition of intelligence. So instead of using human beings as the definition, there's this, which is a beautiful definition: goal-directed adaptive behavior. Goal-directed in the sense we're trying to route our vehicles to maximize deliveries, or allocate our staff to maximize learning development, or allocate our marketing funds to maximize reach, whatever. You have to have a goal, and it's usually a complex goal you're trying to achieve. Behavior is how quickly you can answer that question. Now, we've just discovered if you use the wrong algorithm, it will take longer than the age of the universe. If you use the right algorithm, it will take seconds or milliseconds. The key word, though, in this definition is adaptive. What you want to do is build systems that can make decisions, learn about whether those decisions are good or bad, adapt themselves so that next time they make better decisions. If I'm being totally honest, you don't see adaptive systems in production. So I would actually argue that nobody's really doing AI to what is the true definition of intelligence. That's not to say that organizations aren't architecting themselves towards this, but they are. But building adaptive systems that are safe in production is extremely hard. It's 100 times harder than building automation, and I think there's less than a handful of companies in the world know how to do it. A little bit of a history lesson. So this is AI in the 60s and 70s. This is Socrates before he kills himself. Socrates is famous for inspiring the Socratic methods. So if I say to you Socrates is a man, and all men are mortal, I can infer that Socrates is mortal. And AI was writing down lots of these rules and then trying to infer new knowledge from those rules. They didn't really work, they didn't really scale. In the 80s and 90s, a new type of AI came along that's modeled on how biology learns. This is the brain of a bumblebee. My PhD 20 years ago was trying to take the brain of a bumblebee. Bumblebees have 1 million brain cells. Their brains can fit on the end of a needle. Bumblebees can do amazing things. They navigate 3D worlds, they talk to each other, they solve problems, they don't handle windows very well, but ultimately they're very smart creatures. And the question was, can you model a bumblebee brain in a machine? And 20 years ago you couldn't. About 13 years ago there was a new extension in this technology now called deep learning, or large language models, that now allow us to build billions of neurons. And we can teach these brains to do things that humans can do. This is what people are currently calling AI. I would argue these brains are very good at knowing things about the world. You want to use these brains to know things, you want to use these technologies to then make decisions, and then you want to build systems that can safely adapt themselves in production. That for me is a true paradigm of AI. Actually, I find these definitions now wholly unuseful. I've built an entire career, companies on the definitions of AI, and they're not useful because everything that we do in industry is we build very specific solutions to solve very specific problems. More recently, I've been looking at AI through a different lens, through its applications. Over the past few decades, new algorithms, compute, data has now allowed us to do very interesting things. And I think there are 6 categories, 6 applications of AI. The first application is task automation. Now, task automation gets a bad reputation in the AI community. It's using very simple algorithms, macros, if-then-else statements to essentially free people up from doing mundane tasks, repetitive tasks, and freeing them up to do more interesting things. Whilst these technologies are simple, the fact is that they can drive a massive amount of value in the business. Okay, so we should acknowledge them. The second category is content generation. So this is ChatGPT and DALL-E, and everybody now will be able to generate content. It could become a commodity. The one idea I want you to take away with you today is a concept called brand brains. So I'm in WPP, they produce a quarter of the world's content for brands. What you need to do is you need to build a brain, train a brain on your brand based on all the assets, tone of voice, style guides, all that kind of stuff, and glue that brain on top of these different models so that when a creative or whoever is asking a question of the language model, the brand brain contextualizes it, and if I say, for example, create me an image of a cat holding a soft drink in space, if I'm talking about the Coca-Cola account, it knows that it needs to have Coca-Cola and all that kind of stuff. So brand brains are going to be very important. It's going to allow companies to create very specific contextualized content. The third, I used to say a year ago, this was about taking human beings that are the interface and replacing it by things that look and behave exactly like a human being. So this would be like call centers, even salespeople. But now I want to talk about a concept called audience brains. So I can create content, but what I want to do is I want to show that content to my target audience and understand how they perceive that content. It used to be, 2 years ago, that all we could do is spot that that's a cat and that's a soda and that's space. But you, when you look at a piece of content, you create a complex narrative in your mind that's nostalgic and exciting. And what we need to do is correlate that narrative that you create in your mind with clicks and sales. And now AI can do that, so we can build audience brains that essentially represent the same narrative that you create in your mind. So what's exciting about this is you can also build responsible brains. So I can build a brain that is trained on a newspaper or a political party or a legal system or a minority group or a culture, and I can show that content to those council of responsibility brains, and they can tell me whether I'm infringing any laws or any cultural norms, and they can essentially guide me to make sure that I'm creating content that's awesome. The fourth category is, I guess, what everybody's been excited about in the past 10 years, which is using machine learning to extract insights from data. You already know by now that by giving human beings more insights, it doesn't necessarily lead to better decisions. However, these technologies are amazing because they can help us not only extract insights from data, they can explain how those insights exist, and they can help us understand the world in new and exciting ways. The fifth category, we've already talked about decision making, using complex algorithms to solve these massive problems. And I would argue that you get the biggest real win of applying these types of technologies to your business right now. The final category, human representation. Again, a year ago I'd be talking about exoskeletons, I'd be talking about cybernetics, I'd be talking about building your digital twin in the metaverse that represents you. Just to give you an insight in how we use this concept, we build digital representations of employees. So I would take all of your data and I would build a brain that represents you, and I would then ask that brain, if I put you on this team, will you work well? If I put you on this project, will you develop your career? So you can actually build a representation now of your employees or anybody and have that help make better decisions. Those are the 6 categories, and the reason why I like these 6 categories is because each one of them raise different safety questions, ethical questions, philosophical questions. The questions that you need to ask yourself when doing task automation is very different when building a digital representation of your employees. Okay, so if I build a digital representation of your employees, I can understand if they have secret lovers in the company, if they're going to leave the company before they know they're going to leave the company. So different questions need to be asked. I'm going to talk about innovation just very quickly. So this is a hierarchy, and most organizations have hierarchies that breed interesting relationships. This is not a picture of my company, although most people do sell drugs through to that's quite common in my company. And I would argue that hierarchies are not conducive for adaptation. Remember, adaptation is synonymous with intelligence. The faster you can adapt, the more intelligent you are. So organizations have been embracing new types of methodologies, agile and scrum and design thinking. And the idea behind this is that you need to adapt more quickly to a changing world. And adaptation really means innovation. I would argue actually this technology stack that I've just described to you will become a commodity over the next few years. You already have access to tons of free compute, lots of data, all of the tools you need to build brains, it's all free. Somebody will commoditize decision making, somebody will commoditize self-learning. But you know this, the battleground for companies is not technology, the battleground is talent. How do you attract, retain, enable talent to use these technologies for you to innovate? Now, Steve Jobs had a great definition of innovation. He said innovation is creativity that ships. And the most important word in that definition for me is the word that. That is generating ideas and getting to the point where someone's willing to pay for them. That process is long and hard and painful. What we're going to do is shorten that process so we can adapt quickly to a changing world. And one of the key ingredients for innovation is motivation. There's a very good book by a guy called Dan Pink. He said there are 3 things that motivate people: autonomy, mastery, and purpose. Autonomy is giving people the freedom to do what they want, mastery, the ability to become really good at what they want, and purpose is giving them something higher to align themselves with. So what we do in my company, we use the same types of technologies to understand our customers and actually understand our employees. So we take all of our digital footprints of our company and then create these digital maps of our employees. I can identify, for example, if one of these 2 people leave, I get a silo in my company. I can identify people who you go to for advice or feedback. Again, I can identify secret lovers in the company. It does raise lots of interesting ethical questions, but the principle here is that what you want to do is create a liquid workforce so you can allocate them much more flexibly to a rapidly changing world. So you might have come across a term called digital twins. So organizations are now realizing that they need to create essentially a digital infrastructure that allows them to run simulations. So if marketing is going to create a campaign that increases demand by 10%, can I project what impact will that have across my supply chain? Will my suppliers default from their supply? Will I have enough space in my warehouse? Do I have enough people in my stores to sell the stuff? Will I fulfill the customer promise? This is called essentially an operational digital twin. It monitors the flow of goods through your supply chain, and I think it takes 10 years to build a digital twin, by the way. There's also another digital twin, which is your workforce, so understanding what skills, what resources you can layer on top of that operational twin. And finally, processes. And you all have processes like expenses and onboarding, hiring and firing. In some companies, the expense process is I ask for some money, it goes up an email chain to somebody that says yes or no. They have no idea what they're saying yes or no to. I don't know if that's the same in your company. What Gore-Tex do is they make all of their expenses publicly available and then have people self-police each other. So it's a different way of doing expenses, but much more innovative and human. I think there's going to be a convergence over the next 10 years of these 3 digital twins. I'm just going to close and talk about the future, which is what everybody's excited about. So I don't know if you know who said this quote at the top, the nation that leads in AI will be the rule of the world. Does anyone know that quote? Who said that? Vladimir Putin recently, actually. And I think we need to acknowledge that these technologies are going to have the most profound impact not only on our business but on society. Sorry? It was Putin, Vladimir Putin. Close. So, I don't know if you've come across the word singularity. A singularity is a point in time you can't see beyond, and it's been adopted by the AI community to refer to this one, the technological singularity, which is where we build a brain 1 million times smarter than us. I actually think there's at least 6 singularities we need to be concerning ourselves with. And unfortunately, I've mapped them to this framework called PESTLE, which is something that hopefully we're all familiar with. It's a kind of macro analysis framework. So I'm just going to go through them very, very quickly. The first singularity is when we no longer know what is true. So we know that chatbots, misinformation bots, deepfakes have not only challenged our political foundations, they are also now starting to challenge the fabric of our reality. We do not know whether a piece of content that we're engaging with is authentic or not. And I don't know what the world will look like if we lose faith in what we're engaging with. I don't know if you know, a few years ago, there was a machine learning model that was trained on the voice of a CEO, and they got that machine learning model to call the accounts department and they got them to pay an invoice. You now have access to that technology. With 3 seconds of somebody's voice, you can replicate their voice and get them to do things for you. Okay, you all have for $20. The second singularity, environmental singularity. So this is the concern. Consumption gets a bad rap. Consumption, as far as I'm concerned, is giving people access to goods and services that are enriching their lives. But some people do overconsume, but for the most part, it's actually alleviating people from economic constraints. The concern, though, is that it's putting pressure on our planetary boundaries, and we will create uncontrollable ecological collapse. I think actually these technologies are going to help get control of our ecosystem and actually will solve some of these impending problems. So actually very, very hopeful. This is not my domain, but the social singularity is when we cure death. There are people alive today, according to scientists, that won't have to die. So AI is advancing medicine rapidly. It's able to monitor ourselves, to clean ourselves out, and a bit like a car, if we can stay on top of damage, that car will never ever break down. And I don't know what the world will look like if we start to realize that there are people that don't have to die. The technological singularity is the thing that I guess people are currently concerned about, which is where we build a brain 1 million times smarter than us. It's predicted to happen within our lifetime. It's predicted to happen in the next, who knows, 10, 15, 20 years. It could be the most glorious thing that happens to us or our biggest existential threat. I think it's our biggest existential threat, trying to figure out how to mitigate this risk. Yes, I'll talk about it later if you want. The legal singularity is when surveillance becomes ubiquitous, and what we mean by that is that when governments or companies not only know so much about you, but also have the ability to manipulate your decisions to benefit themselves. And we need to essentially decouple those powers of control. And actually, there are already mechanisms to allow us to do this. The final singularity is the economic singularity. It's my favourite singularity. It's coined by a very good friend of mine called Callum Chase. Highly recommend to read his book. So this is the concern about job losses. So AI is amazing at removing frictions from work, from the creation and dissemination of goods. It's my day job. And friction, by the way, usually means human beings. Fortunately, what's happening is people are being freed up to do more interesting things. The concern that Callum and others have is that at some point we will free up whole jobs. And not only that, is that we will create essentially mass technological unemployment, and people won't be able to retrain fast enough to get new jobs because any jobs we create, AI will take. So we'll have prolonged mass technological unemployment, and our economies are not ready to deal with this. Now, controversially, people like Callum, even myself, think we should be automating as fast as possible. If we can automate and remove the friction of the creation and dissemination of food, healthcare, education, shelter, energy, we can bring the cost of that stuff down to zero. Imagine being born into a world where you don't have to work to feed yourself or to educate yourself or to access energy. And then freeing you to go and do the things that you want to do. Now, people say to me, Daniel, what would I do if I didn't have to work? Work defines me. I know lots of people who don't have to work. I don't have to work. I sold my company 18 months ago. I don't have to work for the next 5 lifetimes. Most of the people that I know that don't have to work, they're not sitting at home bored and depressed. They're using their time and their assets to try to contribute positively to humanity. And I bet if I asked you all, what would you do if you didn't have to work? What would you do if you didn't have to work? Travel, read books, travel, spend time with your family. I bet if I keep asking you, you'll say, oh, I'll probably do something that tries to enrich the lives of others or animals. I think we all have an innate desire to want to contribute positively to humanity, and I want to free as many people up as possible to do that over the next 10 years. I think that's probably our only answer to the technological singularity, because if this thing comes along and sees us as a threat, it will probably remove us from the equation. So that's our goal. So I'm just going to close and say, you know this, it's not good enough anymore just to have a strong profitable model. You need to have a strong purpose. If you don't have a strong purpose, you're not going to attract talent, you're not going to attract customers. And I actually believe it's the collective purpose of enterprise that will make a glorious future for us. Anybody that claims they know what the future looks like beyond the next 10 years have no idea what we're talking about. I think over the next 10 years, we're going to see a Cambrian explosion of jobs, of creativity, of uses of these technologies. Beyond that, I think it's very difficult to predict. But what I do know is the future hasn't been created yet. And it's actually up to you, business leaders, decision makers, to make sure that we're using these technologies for good. And I believe genuinely it's the collective purpose of an enterprise that will make this future better. My future that I want to create is a world where everybody is economically free to do whatever they want. And I want to work with as many people as possible to make that future reality. So on that note, I will stop and open to questions. It's all hard to breathe and talk, and I'm not unfit, I promise you. Yes?
You mentioned, I think the word truth, you mentioned the word truth, and then I wondered where truth sits.
Truth.
In your model.
It's a deep question for this time of the morning.
So I was just wondering how, you know, I mean...
Oh, thank you very much, that's very kind. Yeah.
It's kind of, I mean, you explained the levels there.
Yeah.
But where's the truth?
In theory, truth should be information. So information is essentially a fact that you then build insights and decisions from. So that information should, so 210280 is a date of birth, that's a fact, that's true. So I think those are the axioms that then you build the rest of the view from. Yeah.
Who tests that?
Well, I think we should all test our truth. I mean, sometimes it's good enough for you to make good decisions, but we should be testing whether that is true or not. Remember, it doesn't have to be perfect to be able to be better than a human being or be better than your competitors. It just has to be good enough. There's that old allegory where you've got two people in the woods, and a bear jumps out, and one of them bends down, one of the guys bends down and ties his shoelace, and the other guy says, why are you tying your shoelace? You're not going to outrun a bear. And he said, I don't have to outrun a bear, I have to outrun you, right? and I think it's the same, but it doesn't have to be perfect, it just has to be better than other people. Yes?
Ethical governance.
Yeah.
Where are we on that?
Ethical governance. I have a controversial opinion about ethics. I don't think there's such thing as AI ethics. I know that half of us are now AI ethicists or philosophers, but ethics is a study of right and wrong. And what happens is that we have an intent. Our intent is to maximize profit or to maximize career development or whatever. And then what we do is we build a technology, a solution that tries to achieve that intent. Now, the problem with these technologies is sometimes they overachieve their intent, and it causes problems elsewhere. So going back to staff allocation, we worked with a client whose objective was to maximize utilization, billable hours. We were able to build an algorithm that significantly maximized billable hours, but people were driving longer distances to clients, they were not getting enough time to train, so it caused an adverse effect. People were essentially churning. So you need to make sure that the objective function is holistic. But the human beings create the intent, not the AI. AIs do not create intent. And it's the intent that needs to get scrutinized from an ethics perspective. Sometimes the AI overachieves its intent, like it did with utilization, and it causes problems. Sometimes it doesn't achieve its intent because it's biased or it hasn't been tested properly. And I would argue they are not ethical problems, they are safety problems. So let me give you maybe a better example. So imagine you are on the board of ride-hailing company like an Uber or whatever, and you say we need to maximise our revenues, so we're going to build an algorithm that sets prices. Now that algorithm has access to lots of data, and what you realise and discover is that when it accesses people's battery data, and when your battery is very low, you're willing to spend more money on your ride. So essentially you're vulnerable, and it is exploiting a vulnerability. Now the AI isn't making any ethical decisions, all it's doing is achieving its intent, your intent. You as on the board or an ethics committee need to say, am I comfortable with you being exploited because you're vulnerable? Or should I prioritise rides because you are vulnerable? Or should I find rides that have charges in them? It's the intent that needs to get scrutinised from an ethics perspective. Okay, so hopefully that answers your question. Yeah.
I would like to say that in relation to ethics, many times in my case is very shallow. I would say just check GPT on my English. But the thing is that a lot of time I do ask questions about how to respond in certain situation, and it does give me even ethical guidance. It said, well, in the industry, it's very common that you do this and that because it's ethical to avoid your other lawyers or whatever. So I found them providing me advice.
There's been some studies recently to show that these language models are actually more empathetic than human beings. They're perceived to be more empathetic than human beings from doctors and other things like that. So, and actually, if you go to ChatGPT, many years ago, I tried to figure out if we could use these models to extract from all of our corpuses of text, our religious text, our ideologies, our constitutions, to see if there was any ethical pillars we agree on as a species. And I didn't have enough compute power back then, but if you go and ask ChatGPT, give me the core ethical pillars that you think exist, they're actually very, very good. Or if you ask it to go and create the next kind of 10 commandments for humanity, it's really powerful. It's very good. And I'd like to think that, in some respects, it's taking all of that knowledge of humanity and it's embedding them in that result. Yeah. Somebody at the back. Okay. Yes.
Sorry, Mike. Further to your last question about ethics.
Yeah.
What's the role of how are we going to regulate AI, and is there a role for governments? And then you've got questions over geopolitics as well.
Yeah, it's a big problem, isn't it? And so I think one of the more recent interviews that Elon Musk had was saying that any technology that we've developed that has the kind of material impact on people's lives, cars, aeroplanes, nuclear, they've been regulated, and these technologies do and can have a massive impact. The question really is how quickly can governments regulate? So I think there's a hypothesis that in the next 3-5 years we're going to create what's called an AGI, which is an AI that's as smart as all of us. And if you can build an AGI and ask it to then build smarter versions of itself, you very, very quickly get to super intelligence. So we might only have a very short window to implement regulation and then make sure that all the other jurisdictions around the world are aligned with that. I think that's the challenge.
Does that not create a runaway problem?
Sorry, what?
Does that not create a runaway problem?
A runaway problem from an economic perspective, or a runaway problem from a super intelligence perspective? Yes, and of course, yeah, that's the whole point, is that the AGI will then build a better version of itself, and build a better version of itself, and very quickly it will become a million times smarter than us, and I don't know what will happen when we become the second most intelligent species on the planet. Hopefully it kind of realises there are other dimensions and it kind of buggers off. That's why I'm hoping. And hopefully it doesn't kind of take all of our resources with it. That's the goal. My worry though, actually, if I'm honest, is that if we, it's hard to get your head around this maybe, if we realise that chimpanzees could make machines as intelligent as human beings, we would probably stop chimpanzees doing that, because we wouldn't want things as intelligent as human beings, because we might see that as a threat. So I don't think that AI, these super intelligence will necessarily perceive human beings as a threat directly, but our ability to create new super intelligences it might see or perceive as a threat. And it might prevent us from doing that. I don't know, who knows? The point is it's called a singularity, so nobody knows what happens beyond it.
Hi. So, more of a challenge statement and then a question. Your last slide about fast forwarding in 10 years and actually nobody having jobs. What if you're wrong and most of the population aren't as motivated as you, and perhaps you look at COVID, when you take away that purpose and half of society go one way, half of society go another, what would be your perhaps more balanced approach that's perhaps less risky to say where AI is optimal, but not that we're aiming for nobody to be working?
Yeah. Good question. First of all, I don't know. I didn't say that. Hopefully, I didn't say that nobody will have jobs in 10 years' time. I think that nobody knows whether people are going to have jobs in 10 years. I think it's very hard to predict. I gave a scenario where we might have mass technological employment. Maybe I'm just not being creative enough and coming up with all of the possible jobs that we could create in the future that AIs can't do. But let's assume that we will create mass technological employment over the next 20 years. The things that really I've been trying to do over the past 10 years is two things. One, understand how do we take the friction out of goods so that those people that can't work can access goods still without having to pay for them. And also to decentralize and create liquid ways of working. So today, I could be a software developer, tomorrow a photographer, the next day an Uber driver. And if you can decentralize and granularize work, it makes it more accessible for us to continue having the income. So my two solutions was, let's bring the cost of goods down to cheap, and also let's try to make people access work in a much more granular way before we worry about getting to superintelligence. I think the concern now is that we might achieve superintelligence before we solve even that problem. But I'm a big believer in human creativity, and I think that people will come up with ideas that will make other people's lives better. I'm not saying also that if you don't have to work, you have to contribute positively to humanity. You can sit home and smoke crack and whatever you want to do. There are too many people born into poverty, and those people I think could, if they want, and many of them I suspect do, want to contribute positively to humanity. And I want to stop that. I want to make sure those people who are born in poverty have that access. And I'm sure that they have. Okay.
Can I ask you a question?
Yes.
In your presentation, you highlighted the positive and the negative, right, of artificial intelligence. And right now, we see a lot of deepfake and the deep, dark web and all the things being extrapolated as well with generative AI, and seeing cyber creativity, I'd call it, happening. What's your view long term as to how we handle that?
I am a big believer in humanity, and the reason why I'm here talking to you is because I think that it's all of us, it's all of our responsibility to ask ourselves, are we using these technologies for good, and how do we not only hold ourselves accountable, how do we hold each other accountable? I don't think there's 10 people in the world that have a solution. I think we all have a solution, we just need to be more educated about the power of these technologies. So I don't know if that answers your question. But I think I'm not going to solve it, I think that we will solve it. I think that's time. Yeah, okay, thanks very much.